I want to warmly welcome you all, as I said earlier, to the 73rd AGM. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. Let me dwell on the Q1 results approved by your board earlier today. Gross revenues and other income of the company, together with Mahindra Vehicle Manufacturers Limited, we usually look at them together, is 12,997 crore rupees as against 13,550 crores during the corresponding period last year. The net profit before exceptional items of the quarter is 918 crores as against 1,238 crores of the corresponding quarter last year, which was a very high growth quarter. And the net profit after exceptional items of the quarter is 2,260 crores as against 1,257 crores. I think it's worth noting that our performance has exceeded the performance of the industry across all the sectors in which we operate. And looking at it from a comparative perspective, in the three-wheeler segment, the industry degrew 7% and we only degrew 2.4%. In commercial vehicles, we were slightly better than the industry. We only degrew by about 9.4% versus 9.5%. And in passenger vehicles, while the industry degrew 18%, we degrew less than 2%. But let me now share my thoughts on the current market circumstances. And I'll start with very brief comments on the tractor industry. Although the industry has been facing challenges thus far, as you all know very well in Mumbai, we've been experiencing the full bounty of the monsoon rains, especially here. And this teamed with the forecast of normalization of rain in August and September, that really makes me hopeful that there could very well be an uptick in agriculture and the tractor industry. But beyond this very brief comment on the tractor business, I want to really focus the rest of my time on sharing my perspective on the auto industry, where there's been a lot of talk, as you know, about a slowdown. Now, there is what they call a tectonic shift in the industry, and I think the time is ripe for that kind of shift. And I don't see why it should come as a surprise to us that the government is putting all its weight behind the introduction of electric vehicles. I was a speaker at the MOVE Summit in Delhi in September 2018, where the Prime Minister shared what I thought was a bold, well thought out, and holistic vision for the future of mobility, and he publicly committed to it. I do know that he personally lays great store by this future of electric mobility. It was heartening for me to see a government that was not conducting what is called business as usual, but was really propelling us towards an envisioned future that should really improve all our lives. And frankly, that kind of thinking was fully in sync with the thinking in the Mahindra Group. And we are fully on board with that line of thinking. Because who could quarrel with a vision for a mobility system that is gentler on the planet? Who could quarrel with a system that frees us from the dependence on expensive imported fossil fuels? And who amongst us can decry the move towards shared mobility, preferably shared electric mobility? I don't think anyone can, and certainly not us in the Mahindra Group, because we are the pioneers of electric vehicles in India. But I must tell you, people really think that we first got into electric vehicles with the acquisition of Reva, the Bangalore-based Reva, in 2010. But let me tell you, Mahindra made the first electric three-wheeler christened Bijli 20 years ago, in 1999. So please understand, we have always been focused on the future. Perhaps we were ahead of our time. It was a small group of people. We ultimately didn't go into large-scale commercial production with that, but we did several pilot projects. In fact, I've had many people who come back from Vaishno Devi telling me they occasionally see a Mahindra Bijli flying around in that area. So the basic point I'm saying is that the Mahindra Group has long been committed and engaged with electric vehicles. And we're future ready for it. We're just waiting for the wave to rise. So the question is not whether we should move to electric vehicles, but how. Because the auto sector is not just an industry. It's really a living, breathing ecosystem. And it's an ecosystem that has economic and social impact well beyond the number of vehicles sold or the profits of automakers. The auto sector in almost every country, frankly, around the world, is a key driver of the economy with a huge multiplier effect. And India is no different. In India, it constitutes 7.1% of GDP and 49% of manufacturing GDP. Inclusive of its value chain, it supports 37 million jobs. So the ecosystem runs very wide and very deep. As I said, that ecosystem will change, and it is changing, and we are in the throes of that change. But when ecosystems change, there are consequences during a transition. And we have a choice. Either we can let that consequence derail us, or frankly, we can face it squarely and deal with it constructively. So to my mind, the key to creating a win-win situation is to handle the transition in a way that produces the least amount of collateral damage. Can we do this? And we at Mahindra believe it can be done, and not with much difficulty. You know, very often people are prone to looking at the world in terms of contradictions or extremes, black or white, in or out, win or lose. And I think the trick is to shift our mindset from a mentality of either or. We have to think about both and. So I see no contradiction between keeping jobs, reviving the current industry, and at the same time, moving quickly towards our long-term aspirations and goals. What is required is a new era of collaboration and a joint roadmap with both government and industry understanding each other's issues and cooperating in achieving a common goal. So I was naturally very happy to read recently that the CEO of Niti Aayog has said that while the long-term goals are clear, the government will move, quotes, partnership with the private sector, unquote. So he's himself said this must happen in partnership with the private sector. And that is exactly the way to go. As Henry Ford once said, if everyone is moving together, then success takes care of itself. I think there are a few things that can be done in order to move together to everyone's benefit. On the resource side, we need support for both wholesale and retail financing. I think on this front, to my mind, all the right steps are being taken. The rate cuts necessary for revival have been put in place. Today we had another step taken by the RBI in that direction, and the future, in my opinion, looks brighter for NBFCs that have thus far been stressed. So I'm confident that the measures taken will bear fruit, creating greater liquidity for NBFCs, which ultimately will make its way into the hands of the consumer. If I had one wish in this domain, I would still appeal to lenders to take a much more supportive approach to the suppliers in this ecosystem, the component manufacturers, and to our dealers, who are the backbone, to be honest, of the auto ecosystem. Secondly, on the consumption side, that was the resource side. On the consumption side, during this transition, we do need short-term, and I repeat, short-term measures to catalyze consumption. I believe the government's measures to push the auto industry towards change are sincere, and they're far-sighted, as I've said earlier. And I can well understand the government's hesitancy to look at concessions in GST. But there's a paradox here. The auto industry contributes revenues of upwards of 180,000 crores to government treasuries. The paradox I referred to is that while the government needs to be lauded for fiscal responsibility, the current slowdown, in our opinion, poses a greater threat to financial arithmetic. Think about it. According to estimates of SIAM, the industry body, the slowdown has resulted in an 8% loss in GST. There's an 8% loss in GST collection in the first 6 months alone of 2019. So just to catch up with the FY19 GST collections, the auto industry will need to grow at a rate of at least 7% in the remaining 8 months of FY20. And that's going to happen. I believe that kickstarting the auto industry with a few short-term measures will serve a greater national purpose. So the simple first aid that I'm suggesting, simple short-term measures that would remove the immediate barriers to making autos affordable, out of those measures, the most obvious and welcome first aid would be some temporary relief on the GST front, either by modifying the slabs, or if that is not possible, by reducing the cess or removing it. Another suggestion would be a relook at the registration fees. We normally don't look at that, but these have gone up very substantially, and a rollback of the increases in road tax mandated by state governments after the introduction of GST, those are very high. They do need a rollback at this point to make cars more affordable. So I'm hopeful that these few actions, along with the traditional post-monsoon revival that we are all hoping for, these will set us back on track and positively impact the economy. In fact, I am hopeful of more than that. I'm hopeful that re-energizing the auto industry will have what is called a very benevolent ripple effect on the economy. Because as a wise old man once said, all things are connected, like the blood that unites us all. Revival of the auto industry leads to revival of freight. Revival of freight leads to the revival of the truck industry. And all of these revivals will lead to the revival of jobs. Revival of employment and jobs leads to a revival in consumption, and so on. And this is a virtuous cycle that would get us closer to the 5 trillion economy that is our common goal. To come back to the joint roadmap, I can see a clear and achievable goal to make India the global hub for electric vehicles. The global hub for electric vehicles. India can, and in my opinion will be, the greatest consumer of shared electric mobility. To become a global hub, we must also become the largest manufacturer. And we have to own the R&D and the technology as well. The Niti Aayog CEO recognized this when he said recently that we would never be an importing nation in the field of electric vehicles. But this implies setting up a very robust R&D and supply chain infrastructure. So I hear opportunity knocking. I see a one-time opportunity for government and industry to work together to invest in manufacturing, R&D, and the supply chain, and thus make India the undisputed global hub of the electric vehicle world. It's possible. It can be done, and we have to do it. So my call is that let us join forces to consciously create the infrastructure and the ecosystem that India needs to become this global EV hub. Let's combine the skills of industry and the reach of government to bring about change. Let a healthy and flourishing industry be part of the fuel that propels this change. We need a joint transition plan that takes care of the economy, the environment, and people. What we need to do is that we need to talk, we need to act, we need to move.